After 15 years of marriage, my husband chose a younger woman. His regret became my path to empowerment. I stood frozen in my kitchen doorway, watching my husband Mark kiss a woman who wasn't me. She looked barely 25, with perfect skin and a laugh that made my stomach twist. They were so lost in each other that they didn't notice me standing there with grocery bags in my hands. 15 years of marriage flashed before my eyes. 15 years of putting his career first, raising our 2 kids while he traveled for business, and believing his promises that we were building something beautiful together. The bags slipped from my fingers, and the sound of cans hitting the floor finally broke their spell. Mark jumped back like he'd been burned. The young woman, Emily, I would later learn, grabbed her purse and rushed past me without a word. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The man I'd loved since college just stared at me with guilt written all over his face. "Claire, I can explain," he started, but I held up my hand. Not yet. I needed a moment to process that my entire life had just shattered in my own kitchen. The same kitchen where we'd shared breakfast that morning, where he'd kissed my forehead and told me he loved me. "It was nothing," Mark said, running his hands through his hair. "Just a moment of weakness, Claire. You're overreacting." Overreacting? I picked up the scattered groceries with shaking hands, trying to keep my voice steady. Our kids would be home from school soon, and I couldn't let them see me fall apart. Not yet. "How long?" I asked without looking at him. "It doesn't matter." "How long, Mark?" My voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. He shifted uncomfortably. "A few weeks. Maybe a month. Claire, it's not what you think. She makes me feel young again. You and we've become like roommates. When's the last time we really talked?" I wanted to scream that we'd stopped talking because he was never home, that I'd been trying to reconnect for months while he claimed to be too busy with work. Instead, I stood up and looked him in the eyes. "Get out," I whispered. "Get out of my house. Go to her if she makes you feel so young, but don't come back tonight." For 3 days, I pretended everything was normal. I made breakfast for the kids, helped with homework, and smiled when they asked where Daddy was. "Business trip," I told them, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. Mark came back on Thursday with flowers and apologies. He'd ended things with Emily, he promised. It was a mistake, a midlife crisis, whatever I wanted to call it. He just needed me to forgive him so we could move on. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. When you've built your entire adult life around someone, the thought of starting over at 40 feels impossible. So I nodded and accepted his flowers, even though they felt like a bribe. That night, as Mark slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when I'd become someone who settled for scraps of respect. When had I stopped demanding better? The woman I used to be wouldn't have accepted this. But that woman felt like a stranger now. I made a decision in the dark. I would find her again. The messages were right there on his phone. Months of them, not weeks. Photos, plans to meet, intimate conversations that made my heart race with anger. Mark had been living a double life, and I'd been too trusting to see it. "I miss you already," Emily had written just yesterday. "When can we be together for real?" "Soon," Mark had replied. "I just need more time to figure things out with Claire." Figure things out? I wasn't a problem to be solved. I was his wife, the mother of his children, the woman who'd supported his dreams while putting mine on hold. I screenshot everything, my hands trembling with rage. That evening, when Mark asked what was for dinner, I handed him his phone. "You left this on the counter," I said sweetly. Emily texted. His face went white. For the first time in our marriage, Mark had nothing to say. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, and I realized I was already standing on the other side. I started a journal that night. Not for Mark or the marriage, but for me. I wrote about the woman I used to be before I became someone's wife and someone's mother. The woman who wanted to start her own business, who loved painting, who dreamed of traveling the world. Day 1 of finding Claire again, I wrote. "I don't know who I am anymore, but I know who I'm not. I'm not a doormat. I'm not someone who accepts betrayal with a smile. I'm not going to disappear just because my husband decided to trade me in for a newer model." The words felt powerful on paper. For the first time in years, I was writing my own story, instead of playing a supporting role in someone else's. Mark noticed the change immediately. He kept asking if I was okay, if we were okay, if I'd forgiven him. I gave him vague answers and watched him squirm. Let him wonder. Let him worry. I was done making his life comfortable while mine fell apart. The journal became my lifeline, a place where I could be honest about my anger, my hurt, and my slowly growing determination to reclaim my life. You should forgive him, my mother said over coffee. Marriage isn't always easy, Claire. Sometimes men make mistakes. My sister nodded in agreement. Think about the kids. Do you really want to break up their family over one affair? I stared at them in disbelief. These were the women who raised me to be strong, to never settle for less than I deserved. Now they were telling me to smile and pretend my husband's betrayal didn't matter. It wasn't one affair, I said quietly. It was months of lying, months of him planning a future with someone else while I was home raising his children. But he came back, my mother insisted. He chose you. He got caught. I corrected. There's a difference. The disappointment in their eyes hurt more than Mark's betrayal. I'd expected my family to support me, to be angry on my behalf. Instead, they were more concerned about appearances and keeping the peace than they were about my happiness. I left their house feeling more alone than ever, but also strangely free. If they wouldn't support my decision to demand better, I'd have to support myself. Screw them all, Jenna said, refilling my wineglass. You deserve so much better than this, Claire. Jenna had been my best friend since college, the one person who remembered who I was before I became Mrs. Mark Thompson. She was furious on my behalf in a way my family couldn't be. You used to light up rooms, she continued. You had plans, dreams, ambitions. When's the last time you did something just for you? I couldn't remember. Somewhere between diapers and school plays and Mark's career demands, I'd lost myself completely. I'd become a supporting character in my own life. What if I can't find her again? I whispered. What if the real Claire is gone forever? Jenna grabbed my hands. She's not gone. She's just buried under 15 years of putting everyone else first. But she's still there, and she's pissed. For the first time since finding Mark with Emily, I laughed. Really laughed. Jenna was right. The real Claire was pissed, and she was ready to fight back. So what's the plan? Jenna asked with a grin. I smiled back. I'm going to remember who I am. The self-defense class was Jenna's idea, but I embraced it wholeheartedly. Every punch I threw at the heavy bag was for every time I'd bitten my tongue, every dream I'd set aside, every moment I'd made myself smaller to make Mark more comfortable. Good, the instructor Maria called out. Feel that power. You're stronger than you think. She was right. With each class, I felt something awakening in me. Not just physical strength, but mental toughness I'd forgotten I possessed. I was learning to take up space again, to stand my ground, to fight for what I wanted. Mark noticed the change immediately. What's this new hobby about? He asked, eyeing my gym bag suspiciously. It's about me learning to protect myself, I said, meeting his eyes directly. He shifted uncomfortably. Protect yourself from what? From anyone who thinks they can hurt me and get away with it. The message was clear, and we both knew it. Mark was no longer dealing with the passive, accommodating woman he'd married. He was dealing with someone who was remembering her own strength. Mark came home drunk on a Tuesday night, something he rarely did. He found me in the living room, reading a book I'd bought for myself instead of watching his favorite TV show. I don't like this new version of you, he slurred, swaying slightly. You're different, cold. I looked up calmly. I'm not cold. I'm just not pretending anymore. Pretending what? Pretending that what you did doesn't matter. Pretending that I'm okay with being treated like I'm disposable. Pretending that I don't deserve better. His face darkened. I said I was sorry. I ended it with her. What more do you want? I closed my book and stood up. The self-defense classes had taught me more than just how to throw a punch. They'd taught me how to stand tall, how to project confidence even when I was scared. I want you to understand that sorry isn't enough anymore, I said. I want you to understand that you don't get to decide when this is over. And I want you to understand that if you ever speak to me like that again, you'll be looking for a new place to live. Mark stepped back, shocked. I'd never stood up to him like that before. I was buying coffee when I saw her. Emily, the woman who'd been kissing my husband in my kitchen. She was even prettier up close, with the kind of effortless beauty that comes from being young and unburdened by life's disappointments. She recognized me too. I could see it in the way her face flushed, the way she suddenly became very interested in her phone. Part of me wanted to walk away, to avoid the confrontation. But the new Claire, the one who was learning to fight, had other plans. "Emily," I said, approaching her table. She looked up, startled. "Mrs. Thompson, I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm sure you didn't." I sat down across from her without being invited. "We need to talk." She fidgeted with her coffee cup. "I don't think that's a good idea." "I think it's a perfect idea. You see, my husband told me he ended things with you, but I found more messages on his phone yesterday. So either he's lying to me, or he's lying to you. Which is it?" Her face crumpled. "He said he was getting divorced. He said you two were basically separated already." The lies kept coming. Even in his affair, Mark couldn't be honest. That night, I sat in my bedroom and really looked at myself in the mirror for the first time in years. When had I stopped caring about my appearance? When had I started dressing like I was invisible? I thought about the woman I used to be. Confident, ambitious, full of dreams. She wouldn't have accepted Mark's excuses. She wouldn't have hidden from confrontation. She would have demanded the respect she deserved. I opened my laptop and started typing. Not in my journal this time, but on a blog I'd been thinking about starting. Rediscovering Claire would be its name, and it would chronicle my journey back to myself. Day 15 of Finding Claire Again. I wrote, "Today I realized that I've been living like a ghost in my own life. I've been so focused on keeping everyone else happy that I forgot I mattered too. But ghosts don't feel pain, and I'm definitely feeling pain, which means I'm definitely still alive." The words flowed out of me like water from a broken dam. All the hurt, all the anger, all the determination to be better. I hit publish before I could lose my nerve. Within hours, I had comments from women sharing their own stories. "What the hell is this?" Mark demanded, shoving his laptop in my face. My blog post was open on the screen, along with dozens of supportive comments from strangers who understood my pain. "It's my story," I said calmly. "Our story. You can't just put our private business online for everyone to see." I didn't mention your name. I didn't mention Emily's name. I told my story about learning to value myself again. If you're uncomfortable with that, maybe you should ask yourself why. Mark's face was red with anger. "People will figure it out. My colleagues, my boss, what if they read this? Then maybe you should have thought about that before you had an affair." He slammed the laptop shut. "I want you to delete it." "No." The word hung in the air between us, simple, final, non-negotiable. Mark stared at me like he'd never seen me before, in a way he hadn't. The woman who would have immediately apologized and deleted the post was gone. In her place was someone who refused to be silenced. The messages kept coming. Women from all over the world sharing their stories of betrayal, of finding strength after heartbreak, of learning to put themselves first. My little blog was becoming a community, and I was accidentally becoming its leader. "Thank you for writing this," one message read. "I thought I was the only one who felt invisible in my own marriage." "Your words gave me the courage to leave," wrote another. "I've been making excuses for him for years." Each message reminded me that I wasn't alone, that my pain was valid, that my decision to demand better was right. I started writing more frequently, sharing the small victories and setbacks of my journey back to myself. Mark hated it. He kept asking me to stop, kept insisting I was embarrassing our family. But the more he protested, the more determined I became to keep writing. For the first time in years, I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone silence it again. The blog was becoming more than just therapy. It was becoming my purpose. Mark was getting desperate. He brought me flowers every few days, cooked dinner when he was home, and kept telling anyone who would listen what a wonderful husband he was. At the kids' school events, he was extra attentive, extra affectionate, putting on a show for the other parents. But I could see through the performance now. When we were alone, he was distant and resentful. He was angry that I wouldn't just forgive and forget, angry that I was making a big deal out of his affair, angry that I was no longer the compliant wife he'd married. "People are starting to talk," he said one evening. Sandra from next door asked me if everything was okay between us. This blog of yours is causing problems. My blog is causing problems, not your affair? The affair is over. How many times do I have to say that? The affair might be over, but the damage isn't. You can't just put a Band-Aid on 15 years of trust and expect it to heal overnight. Mark threw his hands up in frustration. What do you want from me, Claire? I've apologized. I've ended it. I'm trying to make things right. I want you to understand that you broke something that can't be easily fixed, and I want you to stop acting like I'm the problem for not getting over it fast enough. My blog reached 1,000 followers, then 5,000, then 10,000. Women were sharing their stories, supporting each other, and finding strength in community. I started receiving messages from therapists and counselors who were sharing my posts with their clients. You're creating something beautiful here, Jenna said, reading through the comments on my latest post. You're helping people. She was right. What had started as my personal therapy had become something bigger. I was accidentally building a movement of women who refused to accept less than they deserved. Mark was furious about the attention. You're becoming obsessed with this blog, he accused. You spend more time writing about our problems than you do trying to fix them. I am fixing them, I replied. I'm fixing me. The blog was teaching me that I had value beyond being someone's wife and someone's mother. I had thoughts worth sharing, experiences worth discussing, and wisdom worth passing on. For the first time in years, I felt like I mattered, and that feeling was addictive. The email arrived on a Thursday morning. A literary agent had read my blog and wanted to discuss a book deal. A book deal. About my story, my journey, my words. I stared at the email for a full 5 minutes, convinced it was spam, but it was real. Someone thought my story was worth telling on a bigger stage. I called Jenna immediately. This is incredible, Claire. You're going to be a published author. I don't know, I said, doubt creeping in. What if I'm not good enough? What if no one wants to read it? Are you kidding me? Look at your blog. Thousands of people are already reading your story. You're helping people heal, helping them find their strength. Of course they want to read more. That evening, I mentioned the book offer to Mark. His reaction was immediate and predictable. Absolutely not, he said. Bad enough you're airing our dirty laundry online? Now you want to write a whole book about it? It's not about you, I said. It's about me finding myself again. Everything about your finding yourself is about making me look bad. I realized then that Mark would never support my success if it came at the cost of his comfort. I started working on the book proposal in secret, writing late at night after Mark went to bed. The agent, Patricia, was encouraging and professional, helping me shape my story into something that could help even more women. Your voice is authentic, she told me during our first phone call. Women are hungry for real stories about real struggles. You're not preaching or pretending to have all the answers. You're just sharing your journey, and that's powerful. The book would be part memoir, part self-help guide for women trying to rediscover themselves after betrayal or loss. I was terrified and exhilarated at the same time. Mark noticed my late-night writing sessions. What are you working on now? He asked suspiciously. Just blog posts, I lied. I wasn't ready to tell him about the book. I needed to protect this dream until it was strong enough to survive his disapproval. The deception felt strange but necessary. For too many years I'd shared every dream with Mark, only to watch him find reasons why they wouldn't work. This time, I was keeping my ambitions to myself until they were too real to dismiss. The book contract arrived 3 weeks later. Real money, real deadlines, real validation that my story mattered. I signed it in Patricia's office, my hands shaking with excitement and fear. Congratulations, she said, shaking my hand. You're officially an author. An author. Me. The woman who'd been told she was overreacting, who'd been dismissed and betrayed and made to feel small. I was going to be a published author. That night, I told Mark about the book deal. His face went through several emotions: surprise, anger, and something that looked like fear. You can't publish a book about our marriage, he said. I won't let you. You don't get to decide what I can and can't do with my life anymore, I replied. The book is about my journey, my healing, my growth. If you're uncomfortable with that, maybe you should think about why. This is about revenge, isn't it? You want to humiliate me publicly. This is about helping other women who are going through what I went through. If that makes you uncomfortable, that says more about you than it does about me. Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic as my book deadline approached. He would swing between trying to win me back with grand gestures and punishing me with cold silence. He started working late more often, claiming he needed to clear his head. I suspected he was seeing Emily again, but I found I didn't care as much as I thought I would. The book was consuming my energy in the best possible way. I was writing about pain and healing, about finding strength in unexpected places, about the difference between being alone and being lonely. My blog followers had grown to over 50,000, and the comments were more supportive than ever. Women were sharing their own stories of transformation, of leaving toxic relationships, of putting themselves first for the first time in years. "You saved my life," one woman wrote. "I was ready to accept that this was all I deserved. Your blog showed me I was wrong." Messages like that made every late night, every argument with Mark, every moment of doubt worth it. I was making a difference, and that felt better than any apology Mark could offer. I found the credit card statements by accident, tucked behind some files in Mark's desk. Expensive restaurants, hotel rooms, jewelry purchases, all on dates when he claimed to be working late or traveling for business. He'd been spending our money on his affair, our children's college fund, our retirement savings, our family's security. He'd been using it all to wine and dine his girlfriend. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. But this time it came with clarity. Mark hadn't just cheated on me emotionally and physically, he'd stolen from our family to do it. I photographed every statement, every receipt, every piece of evidence. If Mark wanted to play games, I was ready to play back. That night, I confronted him with the evidence. $12,000, I said, spreading the statements across the kitchen table. That's how much you've spent on her in the past 6 months. Mark's face went white. "Claire, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why you thought it was okay to steal from your children's future to pay for your midlife crisis?" He had no answer. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Mark had absolutely nothing to say. The lawyer was kind but direct. "You have grounds for divorce," she said, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. "The financial infidelity alone would be enough, but combined with the affair and the emotional abuse, you have a strong case." Emotional abuse. I'd never thought of it that way, but she was right. Mark's gaslighting, his attempts to make me feel crazy for being hurt, his insistence that I was overreacting. It was all abuse. "What about the kids?" I asked. "Joint custody is standard, but given his financial irresponsibility and the affair, we might be able to negotiate something more favorable for you." I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. I finally had a plan, a way forward that didn't involve pretending Mark's betrayal didn't matter. That evening, I told Jenna about my decision to file for divorce. "It's about time," she said, hugging me tightly. "You deserve so much better than this, Claire. You always have." She was right. I did deserve better. And for the first time in 15 years, I was ready to demand it. The divorce papers were served at Mark's office on a Tuesday morning. He called me immediately, his voice shaking with rage. "How could you do this to me?" he demanded. "To our family?" "I didn't do anything to our family," I replied calmly. "You did. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen anymore. We can work this out, Claire. We don't need lawyers and courts and all this drama." "We had 15 years to work it out. You chose to spend that time with Emily instead." Mark showed up at the house that evening, desperate and angry. "You're destroying everything we built together," he said. "You destroyed it the moment you brought another woman into our marriage," I replied. "I'm just cleaning up the mess." "What about the kids? What about our family?" "Our kids will be fine. They'll be better off with parents who are honest about their feelings than with parents who pretend everything is okay when it's not." Mark left that night, and I felt peace for the first time in months. My book was published 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Rediscovering Claire, A Journey from Betrayal to Empowerment, became a bestseller within weeks. Women lined up at bookstores to share their own stories, to thank me for giving them permission to demand better. Mark tried to stop the publication, claiming it violated his privacy. But since I'd changed all the names and focused on my internal journey rather than the details of his affair, there was nothing he could do legally. The success of the book opened doors I'd never imagined. Speaking engagements, podcast interviews, opportunities to help other women find their voices. I was building a career based on my own experiences, my own strength, my own words. "I'm proud of you," Jenna said at my book launch party. "Look what you've built from the ashes of your marriage." She was right. I'd taken the worst experience of my life and turned it into something beautiful, something that helped others. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had become the foundation for my new life. Mark tried to reconcile several times over the following year. He would show up at my door with flowers and apologies, claiming he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Emily had left him, he said. He realized what he'd lost. He wanted his family back. But I was no longer the woman who would accept scraps of attention and call it love. I'd learned my worth, and it was far more than Mark had ever been willing to give. "I forgive you," I told him during his last attempt at reconciliation. "Not for you, but for me. I forgive you so I can move on completely." "Does that mean we can try again?" he asked hopefully. "No," I said gently. "It means I'm free." The look on his face was heartbreaking, but I felt only peace. I'd spent too many years trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken. Now I was building something new, something that was entirely mine. 2 years after my divorce, I was living a life I'd never imagined possible. My second book was in progress, my speaking career was thriving, and I'd started a nonprofit organization to help women leaving abusive relationships. The kids were doing well, splitting their time between Mark and me. They'd adjusted to the divorce better than I'd expected, and I realized they were happier with honest parents than they'd been with parents who were pretending. Mark had started therapy and was working on himself, which I was glad to see for the kids' sake. We were cordial but distant, focused on co-parenting rather than trying to rebuild something that had never been healthy. I stood in my new apartment, smaller than the house I'd shared with Mark, but entirely mine, and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The woman who'd been devastated by her husband's betrayal was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth, someone who would never again accept less than she deserved. Mark's affair had been the catalyst for the best thing that ever happened to me, finding myself again. His regret had become my empowerment, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.